All right, sports fans, how's everybody out there doing? William Martin coming at you one more time here on YouTube with another edition of the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge Podcast. Now, the Brooklyn Nets entered this NBA season expecting to contend for the NBA championship, but instead they are heading home after the first round as they failed to win a playoff game, more or less advance in the first round of the postseason. And for what it's worth, the Nets are the first team headed home from the round of 16 in the NBA playoffs, and they're also the only team who got swept. Now, for the most part, in this series, Kevin Durant was held in check by the Boston Celtics in this first round series. He averaged 26.3 points per game in the four games, but that also included him being limited to just 16 points in the game three loss a couple of nights ago. Now, this Celtics defense did a good job for the entire series in not allowing KD to breathe. Credit to Jalen Brown and company as Durant shot less than 40% from the field in this series. Kyrie Irving averaged just over 21 points for the series, and outside of his 39-point outburst in game number one, he was held in check by this Celtics defense as well. Now, this series was a reality check for the Nets, as you cannot be a bad team during the regular season and just magically turn on the switch when you want to in the postseason. And that's what the Nets were trying to do. You go back to the beginning of the season, the first half of the series, of the season rather, the Nets were looking better than what they were at the end of the season. But that Kevin Durant knee injury really derailed them. And then not having Kyrie Irving available for the majority of the season to play at in home games at the Barclays Center, and then the drama between James Harden and Kyrie Irving, which ultimately led to James Harden being traded, as he could not take the fact that the Brooklyn Nets weren't his team. Obviously, they were KD's team, and he couldn't basically accept being the third fiddle in the whole thing between KD, Kyrie, and of course himself. Then you add Ben Simmons into that mix, as James Harden was practically traded for Ben Simmons, and Ben Simmons has still yet to play a game for the Brooklyn Nets. So all of this drama, what to me was just simply too much for the Nets to overcome. And your flaws are always exposed at the most inopportune time. And, we saw that from the Brooklyn Nets in this series. The Celtics were the best team defensively in the NBA all season long. And it showed up once again in this series, especially in those critical moments. From the opening tip of this series to its end, the Celtics were the better team. And in the postseason, generally, the better teams are the ones who advance. You look at Jason Tatum, he really stepped up in this series for Boston, averaged nearly 30 points per game to go along with 7 assists. You look at the contributions from Jalen Brown, veteran guard Marcus Smart, who is, tough and gritty at both ends of the court. Al Horford, another veteran who's kind of been there and done that. And all of that really showed in this series for the Celtics. Then you look at the head coaching matchup. Ime Udoka against Steve Nash. Yes, this is Ime Udoka's first year as a head coach in the NBA, and of course, obviously with the Boston Celtics. But the biggest difference is he has years worth of experience under his belt as an assistant coach in the NBA. I question the Steve Nash hire from the jump for the Brooklyn Nets. You hired a head coach who didn't even have any previous head coaching experience, but more or less never had experience as an assistant coach either. And his lack of experience in the X's and O's showed up in the most critical times in this series. If you look at this series for the most part, the Nets were in every single game in the fourth quarter. But those fourth quarter moments come down to the X's and O's of a head coach being able to put his guys in the right position. And that's something that Steve Nash failed to do for the majority of the series. He also failed to make adjustments throughout this series. And the bottom line is he got out coached. Now, for KD and Kyrie, they wanted the spotlight of New York City, especially for Kevin Durant. You wanted the spotlight. And of course, when to the victor goes the spoils in the Big Apple. But guess what? You failed once again, and now you have to deal with the media backlash. And like I said, when KD first came to Brooklyn several years ago, you could not handle the media in Oklahoma City and you could not handle the media in the Bay Area. So, what makes you think that you're going to be able to deal with the media in the media capital of the world? And the same thing goes for Kyrie with his issues in Cleveland and Boston prior to coming here to play for the Brooklyn Nets. So you look at it as a whole. And for me, this KD Kyrie, duo, they've been an absolute failure since they came to the Nets. This is year number 3, and I know that Kevin Durant did not play his first year with the Nets as he was recovering from that ruptured Achilles suffered in the 2019 NBA Finals. But nonetheless, 3 seasons being a part of the Nets organization, and all you have to show for it is one series victory in the postseason, and that came last year. And by the looks of things, the way things are going right now for the Brooklyn Nets, it looks like they're about to get their third different head coach for Kyrie and Kevin Durant. Because remember, Kenny Atkinson was there when these two guys joined the team a couple of years ago. And after year number 1, Kenny Atkinson just flat out quit. Now it's Steve Nash. And obviously, Steve Nash cannot get it done with this club. So now the Nets are going to have to go out there and get themselves an experienced coach going forward. Now, again, for me, I think it was a big mistake for them to bring in Steve Nash, especially with this team right here. It showed. And, for KD and Kyrie, I thought they didn't need a head coach. That was the moniker, several years ago. And you know what? It showed up once again and again. When your flaws tend to show up at the most inopportune time. And again, the coaching aspect, the depth aspect of the Brooklyn Nets as well, all of this showed up in this series, and this is a big reason why, or several big reasons why, this team is getting ready to empty out their lockers and prepare for the summer. Now, for Kevin Durant, hands down, he is one of the greatest scorers that the NBA has ever seen. Is when he's on a roll, he's on a roll. But the bottom line is, this is another stain on his legacy. You talk about KD, and of course, he got his fair share of criticism several years ago when he left the Oklahoma City Thunder, who had a 3-1 lead in the Western Conference Finals, to join the Golden State Warriors, a 73-win team from the year before, a team that had just won the NBA championship a couple of years before that. And then, yes, you go there in your first 2 years and you win NBA titles. But the bottom line is, he's still searching for respect that he never got after, being a part of those Golden State Warriors teams. He tried to come to another team and prove that he could do it on his own. And so far, he has been unable to do that. And you look at it for the most part, this is just like this is going to give his critics more fuel to their fire to say, hey, you know what? This guy can't do it. This guy's not clutch, X, Y, and Z. This guy has to go to team with somebody to get help. You name it. You're going to hear a ton of that in the coming days from social media, from sports analysts on TV, YouTube, you name it. But for the Nets, this series was a microcosm of their season, and I harp on it again as far as the better team won. And I think the final moments of game 1 really played so big for this series because if you look at the waning moments of game number 1, on the Nets' final possession, it was only KD and Kyrie who really possessed the basketball when the Nets were trying to close out the game and they couldn't do it. And then you go back to that Celtics final possession after that Durant missed shot. All 5 guys on the court for the Boston Celtics touched the basketball. And that's what this game of basketball is all about. It's all about team, it's all about ball movement, it's all about keeping everybody involved. And with that said, nobody panicked, nobody hesitated, nobody forced a shot. They played team ball. Everybody got a touch. They fed into the flow. Jason Tatum made that great spin move off of Kyrie Irving, and of course, the rest is history. Now, you think about where the Nets were 3 years ago, as they, along with the Los Angeles Clippers, signed two-star players to max contracts each. And what do they have to show for it right now? Not that much. The Clippers, they got to the Western Conference Finals last year for the first time in franchise history, but they did it without Kawhi Leonard. And of course, we saw the debacle from the Clippers in the 2020 playoff bubble. For the Brooklyn Nets, okay, you sacrificed not having KD for year number one. You got to the second round last year without Kyrie, who was injured in that series against the Bucks, and then of course, James Harden, was typical James Harden in the postseason. Now we've had it again, and it's not working again. So for the Nets, obviously Kyrie has a player option. He's saying all the right things, and he's going to say all the right things because with all of his off the court drama, nobody's going to pay Kyrie Irving the type of money that he can get from the Brooklyn Nets next season, which is $36 million. And he's going to look for another big payday. So he's probably going to be on his P's and Q's next year. With that said, can they get Ben Simmons on the court? That's the $1 million equation. I mean, you name it. From physical injuries to mental injuries, you don't know what's going to happen with Ben Simmons. So with that said, the Nets paid a very steep price to get James Harden off of their hands. But the bottom line is, yes, you got James Harden off of your hands, but you still have another issue, and that is Ben Simmons. So what's going to happen there? And more importantly, who's going to coach this team? Because you need a veteran coach, somebody that these guys are going to respect, and somebody who's going to hold these guys accountable, including Kevin Durant and Kyrie. So good luck with that if you are Nets management. Honestly, at this point, I'm not surprised to see the Nets where they're at currently. Yes, I did pick the Nets to win this series in 7 games, but nonetheless, we saw this several years ago from the Brooklyn Nets when they tried to make that big splash in going out there and attempting to acquire, an aging Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett from the Boston Celtics, a team with the likes of Brooke Lopez and Darren Williams in downtown Brooklyn, and it did not work. And, they tried this formula again after they were slowly building. And what did they have to show for it once again? Not a lot. And, this series right here and this Brooklyn Nets team as a whole, it shows you once again, winning a title is not as easy as it seems. As you see, most of these star players that are hopping from one team to another in the NBA to chase rings are getting consistent reality checks. It's not that easy. And, KD and Kyrie, this is a huge reality check for them. I think what they're each going to have to do next season is check their respective egos at the door and do it for the betterment of the team. But again, it's not going to matter because the Nets have to try to find a way to get something out of Ben Simmons as well. You gave up a lot for this guy, so he has to fit into the equation. And if he doesn't, we're going to continue to have these conversations in the very near future for this organization. So if you're the Brooklyn Nets, a huge disappointment. You're out in the first round. You're the first team eliminated from the first round of the playoffs. And also, you're the only team in the NBA to get swept. That's how bad things are for the Brooklyn Nets. The bottom line is the better team won. That's the Boston Celtics. That's why they are moving on. And that's why the Brooklyn Nets are packing their bags and getting ready to empty out their lockers at the Barclays Center. So, folks, that is going to wrap it up. And as always, I want to take this time out to thank you for tuning into the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. I want to take the time out to thank all of you fine folks out there for tuning in. And if you have not already, please feel free to subscribe to this channel. Now, if you're on Twitter, please feel free to follow me at 300 Pounds of Sports. And like I always say, if you follow me, it'll be my pleasure to follow you right back. There's also the sports discussion group on Facebook at the Sports Depot 365. You can check it out. drop a line and be a part of one of the better sports debating sites going on social media. So, once again, fine folks, my name is William Martin. I'm signing off, saying take care and have yourselves a wonderful day.